Record progress.
Hello, and welcome to Food as Medicine, a discussion. My name is Angel Moore, and I am the Special Events and Committees Manager at Community Health. Community Health is one of the largest volunteer based free health centers in the United States. We provide primary and specialty care, prescription medications, mental health and dental services, health education, and lab testing at 3 locations in Chicago. Community Health provides all of these services to low income, uninsured, and underinsured adults at no charge. We do this with the support of over 1,000 volunteers, partnerships with dozens of institutions, and donations from generous people like you. Thank you for being here and for supporting community health. I would especially like to recognize our many sponsors who are supporting this year's All In series, including Baxter, Lundbeck, the Joseph and Bessie Feinberg Foundation, West Monroe Partners, and many others. I encourage you to visit our website, allin-chicago.org, to see the complete list of sponsors, read the bios for our incredible speakers, and check out the rest of the months in beds. Finally, I want to recognize this year's All In Executive Leadership Council. We have the privilege of having two outstanding leaders serving on the council this year. Their great insights and support have been instrumental in bringing this year's series to life. Thank you to Dr. Suzette McKinney and David Smith for your contributions this year. The goal of the All in Chicago series is to bring together leaders from many different industries and segments of our population to talk about how we can work together to ensure every resident has access to the right care in the right place at the right time. Community Health has been hosting all-in events discussing access to healthcare in Chicago since 2015. COVID-19 shone a spotlight on many health inequities in our city, and it is essential that we learn from the pandemic and continue the discussion to strive for greater health equity throughout Chicago. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's conversation, Tim Kohler. Tim is the former executive director and a current board member at Top Box Foods, a community-driven nonprofit based in Chicago that creates access to healthy and affordable food. Top Box offers fresh produce and other healthy groceries to support community partners in nutrition and hunger initiatives, encourage individuals to take charge of their health, and promote the development of a more sustainable food system. With no further ado, I will hand things over to Tim to frame things up and then introduce you to our panelists. Thanks for being here, Tim.
Thank you, Angel, and thank you everyone for joining this important discussion. So we've got a great session for you guys, three wonderful panelists, very visionary leaders that I'd like to introduce now, and then we can kind of get into the discussion. So the first one is Sean Ruane, who was born in the southwest side of Chicago and developed a love for growing food at an early age while spending time at his grandparents' farm in Ireland. He's the co-founder of Just Roots and currently serves as the director of operations and development. Sean holds a BA in education and an MA in justice education and a certificate in sustainable urban agriculture through the Windy City Harvest Apprenticeship Program. He served as an ambassador and educator and a longtime nonprofit leader for over a decade, and believes growing food is a powerful force for cultivating more sustainable, resilient, and collaborative communities. So I welcome Sean, and I look forward to discussing a variety of topics with you today. Our next panelist is Selma Sims, who is the CEO and head grower of Gardeneers, which is Chicago's only custom full-service school gardens program, which built and maintains school gardens in 17 CPS schools, and more importantly, involves more than 1,700 middle school student participants from Chicago's south and west sides. As CEO, Selma brings an inspired vision to improve how gardeners grow and distribute food, engages and educates youth, and partners with the community. And like many nonprofit leaders, she also oversees donor relations and staff empowerment for this blossoming nonprofit. So welcome, Selma. Look forward to having a robust discussion with you as well. And finally, Michelle Zurikowski. Dr. Zurikowski has been at the forefront of Beyond Hunger's transformation over the past 2 decades, from a small food pantry to a multifaceted anti-hunger service agency, reaching beyond the basement where the food pantry is located and into the community where hunger lives. Some of the programs developed under her leadership include the Summer Meals Program for children, home delivery for older adults and those with disabilities, social service benefit connections, and pop-up food pantries. And most recently, she has inaugurated an aggressive food rescue program, recruiting local merchants to donate a staggering amount of food, 200,000 pounds of perishable groceries and 20,000 meals from cafeterias each year. So well done, Dr. Zurikowski, and we look forward to your comments today. So I'm going to do a few housekeeping matters. Those that are watching here today are able to answer or ask questions. If you can just use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and if we have time, we'll get to those questions at the end of the discussion today. So once again, welcome everyone, and we look forward to our panelists' comments. So Michelle, I'm gonna start with you, if that's okay. You've been at the forefront of Beyond Hunger's evolution over the last 2 decades, as we mentioned. Can you kind of just set the tone and explain to everyone listening how your direct services have evolved over the years, and particularly in these last few years.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, Tim. So I started as the first paid employee in 2008, just at the start of the Great Recession. So it was kind of like the training wheels for what would become the COVID response in some ways. Back in those days, we were serving just as a small food pantry every Saturday, serving about 30 families. By comparison, last year we served over 42,000 individuals and about 11,000 families. So a lot of growth over the course of that, 15 years or so. And really it's that growth has been embedded in what the community members have said they would like us to do and what kinds of helps that they would like and what kind of support for their own assets they'd like to have. So the first thing that we did was add some benefits connection programs, some SNAP help. Back in those days, the SNAP applications were insane. I mean, they were like, one of them was 11 pages long, one of them was 17 pages long, and they had to be handwritten out and faxed over. So, people needed a lot of help with that. So that was the first program that we added besides the food pantry. The food pantry itself went through a couple iterations. We moved to a client choice model where people could shop for their own groceries. During pandemic, of course, we moved to a drive-through model, as lots of folks did. And then when we went to move back, the people who were coming to the food pantry said, no, please keep the drive-through. We love the drive-through. So now we have the drive-through and the shopping on your own market as well. But in one of the programs that we instituted that initially wasn't community driven, but became really embraced by the community was our nutrition education program. When we switched to a client choice model, one of our funders required us to do a little nutrition component. And we thought, okay, we'll do that for 6 months during this grant period, and then we'll be done with it. But the response from the community was so overwhelmingly positive. At a simple level, it created a really more engaging environment while people were waiting to shop in the food pantry. We had dietitians that were doing lessons, or they do cooking demonstrations, or they had samples of food that they'd made from something that was at the food pantry that day. And it created this environment where, like people were turning to their neighbors and saying, oh, they did that. I do this with artichokes, and could communicate in that kind of level. But
and why do you think that? Why do you think that was? I mean, what do you think with the impetus? Do you think people wanted more?
Yeah, if you're just sitting in a row waiting, like there's no real reason to connect to the person sitting next to you. But if suddenly you're responding to, like I mentioned artichokes, because one day we got 500 pounds of artichokes from the farmer's market, and like, what the heck? Who knows how to deal with an artichoke? I don't. So, but so then that gave people something to kind of joke about, like, have you ever seen that? Like, what are those spiny things? It just breaks a barrier. And so it created that kind of connection, and people could share more. But I think the more important thing that it did was lots of people, about 30 to 40% of the people who come to our food pantry have a family member with some kind of chronic condition, diabetes, hypertension, heart disease. And they've been told by their physicians to eat more healthfully, but they don't know what that means necessarily, or how to incorporate that with food pantry food. Food pantry food. So this was an opportunity for people to, when somebody's up there showing you how to whack up an artichoke, then you feel more comfortable going up to somebody and saying, hey, how would that fit into a diet for diabetics?
Yeah.
So that was a really big, important program that we was supposed to be 6 months, and that started in 2010, and it's a banner program for us today.
That's great. So, and I'm going to segue into what Selma does, because she is really engaging with the youth at an early age, in an effort to kind of solve some of these problems that you're trying to do. And Selma, you work closely with obviously CPS. I think I mentioned 17 schools, 1,700 variety of students, and you're engaging with these young people to kind of introduce healthy food and living a healthier lifestyle. How does working with youth translate to a healthier community, in your opinion?
Well, it's not just my opinion. There's actually research out there to kind of corroborate what we're saying and basically when you get youth to eat healthier, they grow on to become adults that eat healthier, right? And so it's more of just making sure that the foundation of nutritional education is there from the very start, or at least beginning of people's lives. So whether or not they decide to keep it or put it on the shelf for a few years, they do have access to that information, and then they can choose whether or not they will actually utilize it. Lots of white papers. We actually have a social media campaign right now. So if you follow us on Instagram or go to our website at gardeneers.org, and we're Gardeneers Chicago on Instagram, we have photos of our work with quotes from white papers, as well as we cite those white papers because we're scientists and engineers on our staff. And so that's really what it is. You get people access, any type of people access to information earlier. They go on to be individuals who can utilize that information throughout their entire life, well into adulthood.
And what's the outreach effort like to get these students in these CPS schools to get involved in your program?
The great thing is we don't really do any outreach. Schools come to us.
Yeah.
And we do that because when we think of just how philanthropy has worked in the past, it was sometimes a little the cart before the horse, right? And so some people thought, ooh, this place they need us, as where we feel we should be invited into communities to do work. And that way, it's a partnership and a collaboration, and everyone feels invested in the process. And so, of course, we have our website. School partners usually see one of our current garden partners, and they then want that. And then they reach out to us. And then we see what we can do based off our human capacity and the funding that's available.
Are you seeing parents get involved too when these students are starting to get more involved and more excited about healthier food and healthier lifestyles? Do you think it's trickling up rather than trickling down?
We do see a ripple effect, and we actually have two schools that we were discussing as a staff yesterday, that the schools that we see the highest number in students liking vegetables and getting improvements in social emotional growth and learning have not only school participation, they also have outside school community participation. So the schools I'm thinking of is Smith and Chappelle. Smith has been one of our longest standing partners. They have community involvement, including community beds in that garden. And when our staff are not there to maintenance the garden, we have parents of students who either go to Smith or have graduated and matriculated through Smith, still continuing to help take care of the garden. Same for Chappelle. Chappelle actually has like a parent group, the Friends of Chappelle. They help as well as the school in terms of funding and maintenance of the garden. So we do see parent and community and just, family involvement. And the more involvement in those areas we see, the more gardens are able to flourish, the more student participation we have, the more improvements, or at least we see larger gains in numbers of access and appreciation of healthy fruits and vegetables.
Yeah, let's bring Sean into this conversation. Sean, so my understanding, Just Roots kind of established the St. James Community Farm, kind of gave life during the pandemic. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but why don't you talk a little bit about the St. James Community Farm and the growth of that, and why you think that growth has kind of evolved in the last few years?
Yeah, so we have been doing kind of food systems and urban ag work in Bronzeville and kind of the near South Side community since 2017. And we started off as a small incubator farm. And from there, the very first food pantry that we ever donated to in 2017 was the St. James Food Pantry, which is located right on the corner of 29th and Wabash. And we started to build that relationship from there. And over time, they had access to available land that used to be the site of their old church that was torn down in 2013. And the community was looking for a way to revitalize that space in a way that was beneficial, right? That engaged the community, that brought people out and activated it in some way. And so the stars just kind of aligned and the partnership formed from there. So we had lots of grand plans, right? In 2019, after kind of years of doing community relationship building and community engagement work. And we kind of had to take a pause and a step back when COVID hit. But we ended up moving forward with the build out, and we're really truly amazed, by the turnout from the community and the ways that they supported it. And, I think doing that foundational community engagement work and building work like someone was talking about is is key to any of this work, because we want to make sure that we're truly responding to the needs of our community, right? And tailoring programs and services that are actually benefiting them and creating positive, social outcomes. So we've just seen it grow each year. And I think, the struggle or the challenge with it is that it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of hard work to maintain a space that's both growing food at scale while also making sure that it's a beautiful space that people can have a positive therapeutic experience. But the success and the beauty of it is that everything we do is rooted in relationship, and that relationship is with ourselves, it's with our health, it's with each other, and it's with the land, right? And so trying to get people reconnected in all of those different ways is really what we believe and what we're all about.
And what impact are you seeing in the community beyond just kind of the therapeutic nature of what you guys are doing and the kind of sustainability of the land? How about just the fact that folks have access to fresh, affordable produce on a regular basis that they're in essence providing themselves? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think food access is definitely a big part of it for us, right? Michelle was hitting on this a little bit earlier, but part of the reason why we started in the first place is because we were talking early on with teachers, with community members, people who were receiving food from food pantries, people participating, in CSA programs or local farm food access initiatives. And one of the pieces of feedback we kept continuously hearing was, we love getting this fresh food, it's great, but a lot of time it's coming from really large food banks or food pantries, and so it's not as fresh, or it's not really something I would use in my kitchen, and I just don't know how to cook with this. So I think that, like Michelle was speaking to, that cooking education, that nutrition education piece is really key for making it more accessible. But I think too, for us, everything that we grow stays within a 5-mile radius of our farm. So it's rooted in that relationship. And so we're able to grow things based on direct conversation and feedback with our community members. So we're growing things that are culturally affirming and that are ultimately going to be able to be utilized by everybody in their home or community kitchen. So I think the food access piece is huge. And I think just education as well. We do a ton of free educational programming around a host of topics. And so for us, it's not just about providing access to food, but it's also equipping people with skills and resources to know how to grow their own food. And whether they're exercising that at our farms or at their home garden or in a community garden, we want to make sure that more folks know how to do this work.
Yeah. Michelle, kind of coming back on this educational component with Beyond Hunger, and I think all three organizations, the educational component is really, really important. But I know that you have focused on the Austin community and have implemented this Train the Trainer program. Can you talk a little bit about kind of that program? And I think the importance that training component is on the ground and actually in the community.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. We so the Train the Trainer program is just launching this month. So it's a brand new program, and it was really done in conjunction. Again, I think both Selma and Sean have hit on this notion that in order for programs to be successful, they really need to be of and by the community and not just for the community. So we worked, we're part of the Austin Eats work group that's part of the Austin Quality of Life plan. And one of the partners within that plan had done some survey research within the community to see what people really wanted around food. And, in addition to grocery stores, people wanted nutrition education. And we're like, well, we do nutrition education. How could we make this work? So we have actually a client advisory council at Beyond Hunger. And a couple of our members in the client advisory council are also Austin residents. So with conversations with them as well, we hit on this idea of Train the Trainer, because one of them, Tracy, is very active in her church and in various community organizations. And she's like, I've learned so much from the nutrition education programming here. I'd love to be able to share that with the women's group at my church. How might we be able to do that? So we built a curriculum together that will be able to train people like Tracy that can go into church groups and civic groups to bring their own expertise out into the community. So I think it's that notion of listening to what people actually say they want. I'm going to harken back to the drive-through food pantry again, because we thought that was a flash in the pan. Like, we thought the most important thing for people was to go select their own food. But fortunately, we actually asked people. So we did a number of surveys of everybody coming through our food pantry to see, how do you really want to receive your food? And 80% of them said, we want to continue this drive-through, which flew in the face of what we thought.
It shows you how like convenience
Right.
is something that people want.
Important. Privacy was important. And then being able to offer a shopping experience as well for people for whom choice was really important is a great way to go. So it's really trying to listen to what people want and thinking to ask them instead of just assuming that this is what they want. So with the Train the Trainer program, it was built on that basis, listening to the Austin community about what they wanted regarding food, and then talking to our client advisory council about how would it best be built out as a program.
Are you, so right now you're focused in the Austin community, right?
Right, yeah.
And are you gonna kind of test drive it here and then see if you can expand to other?
Exactly.
other
Yeah, we
communities?
serve 13 zip codes. So we always try to focus on one community first and then see what can happen and then alter it in different ways. Because communities are quite different. Austin's very different from Berwyn. We serve both those communities, so it would have to be tailored in a different way.
Selma, you're in 17 CPS schools. And how did those locations evolve for the Gardeneers program?
When you say evolve, can you like elaborate a little more on that for me?
Well, so I think primarily you're in the south and the west side.
Yes, sir.
And those, I think you indicated that those schools came to you. And there was probably some back and forth on whether or not you should start the program there. How does a CPS school employ your services if they wanted a garden, for example?
Okay. Thank you so much for that, clarifying that. Well, a school can always reach out to us via our website, which is gardeneers.org, right? But we as an organization, we choose to focus on the south and west sides, and that's because historically those areas that have invited us in, they have been, for just to maintain diplomacy, they have been forgotten. They have been forgotten, both by governmental entities as well as through social means, or as they say, legally, de jure and de facto forms of segregation. And because of this, we see residual impacts of these things up until this day, almost 100 years later. And so when we're deciding on the school, there are several factors. One, did the school ask us to come there? Is the school invested? Right. And when we say invested, it's one thing to have a teacher that's really interested in our program this year, but will that teacher still be here 3, 4, 7 years from now? Or are we looking to pack up and we're going to have a garden full of weeds in 3 years, right? Does this garden or school community have community involvement? These are all things that are very important to us, as well as location. Making sure the areas that we are in, unfortunately, it's one of those things, we know that the touch points for the areas that we are in are oversaturated with residents. Because when we think of areas of food insecurity, it's not that stores do not exist there. There's stores everywhere. This is America. Capitalism exists. It's how many stores people in these communities can get to and how many people have to rely on said stores. And so we look at those types of factors. We do a lot of asset mapping. It's multifaceted in terms of just our decision-making with these communities, but historical, systemic and systematic practices over long periods of time is one of the major informing factors on whether or not we will partner with the school.
And obviously you're focused on the youth. What are some of the positive, fun little anecdotes that you've experienced over the years on that, how engaging the youth are and how welcoming that they're involved in what they're doing for their community?
Well, one of my favorite stories is always having you find out that what we do, one, as a nonprofit, we have a staff, we have a team of people that get paid to do this. As Michelle mentioned earlier, she was an unpaid member, and then she eventually became CEO. Congratulations. I am so proud of you. I know I just met you, but I'm proud. A lot of people don't understand that nonprofits have staff members and that you can do something like this as a career, as a job, so that our youth understand, oh, I don't have to be the manager at Walgreens. Oh, no, you can actually go to school for agriculture and come back home and get a job. Look, I did. Look at my staff. They did as well. And so that's something that that always amazes me with our youth, but also our students that eventually just, they integrate vegetables, like without even asking. Now, one thing is they will douse it in ranch, but we are from the Midwest, so this is a given. But the fact that there are youth that will pick up vegetables without, we can set a platter of vegetables out at like an event. We don't have to tell them to go eat it, because we've introduced it and they've seen it grow from the garden. We bought something maybe from Jewels or something because we didn't feel like chopping it up. But our youth that they just pick up these habits. They pick up making sure that the garden looks nice. They pick up how we should respect each other in these spaces. And so I have lots of stories. I've been doing this for a while. I don't want to date myself. I've been in youth development almost 20 years. But in terms of gardeneers, I could show you better than I can tell you. That's really what it is.
Do you think the pandemic, like pre-pandemic, the youth prior to the pandemic, the youth during and after the pandemic, do you feel it's the same kind of attitude?
No.
You think
No.
there's been a shift?
Well, we have to remember that the entire globe has gone through a traumatic event. The entire globe. No one was left unscathed. We lost some people. We did lose some people, and our youth, I honestly believe our youth and our seniors were the ones that felt it the most. Our youth, because when we think socially and emotionally, they were still developing, and then they were asked to go inside for 2 years. And then our elders, who they weren't getting much, they did have social outlets, but during the pandemic, the elders that I talked to, a lot of their social outlets were closed, and they were asked to sit inside by themselves for 2 years. And a lot of the elders I spoke to, that's one of their big fears already, but we made them do it. So of course, our youth were asked to put social development on hold for 2 years. So when we get them back in the garden with a group of other youth who are socially stagnated, yes, we see it, just as we see the educational stagnation of our youth. Everyone felt it. And so now we're trying to make sure that we get our youth acclimated to being outside, all while we as adults and the staff and facilitators of the program are also getting used to being back outside. And it's tough. So yes, we have seen the change.
How about you, Sean? Do you think that the pandemic and the kind of as the pandemic begins to thaw a little bit, do you see kind of an attitude change in your organization and particularly the communities that you serve?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible not to see a change, right? Because it's like Selma was saying, it's fundamentally changed all of us, and especially some more than others, depending on a number of different factors. I think for us, I mean, it's always weird to talk about some of the positive things that have come out of COVID, but the reality is, I mean, while it's been such a difficult time, I think in terms of some of the work that we're all doing, I think there have been some positives that have come out of it, which is that I think people are recognizing, we all remember that experience of going to the grocery store in 2020 and how anxiety inducing that was, and just going outside in general. And what we have through our experience and our work, what we've seen is that more and more people are recognizing the importance of growing food locally, of getting connected with organizations like us who are trying to cultivate community green spaces and find ways to grow food organically and sustainably. And I think it's just helping to kind of build a lot more of that, of those community connections and get people more connected to the earth and the environment, which, as we know, can be really challenging in an urban environment, right? Like, we don't necessarily always know that all of those spaces exist. And one of the beautiful things about Chicago is that it's historically, we were growing a huge percentage of our fruits and vegetables during the Victory Garden era in the 1940s. And we've got that really strong history. And there are so many, if you start to look closely, there are so many beautiful urban farms and community gardens in every neighborhood in Chicago. And so my hope moving forward is that folks continue to know that and recognize it and look for ways to plug in and support people doing this work.
What would what would be an easy change that you would love to be made to accelerate that growth in urban gardens and farms?
Oh, it's like the $1 million question.
Yeah, is it land use issues? Is it community engagement? We see empty lots all throughout the city, right? But obviously community gardens and farms aren't popping up everywhere. Is it more community involvement? What are some of the barriers that you would love to see broken down?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a multi-layered question. I think the first thing that comes to mind, just from my own experience of having to navigate land access and water access and kind of some of the barriers that exist to be able to be an urban agriculture practitioner in the city, is just a greater investment, both financially and I think in terms of just like recognizing the benefit of the work from our local government and from like the state government as well, and just finding ways. And there is work already being done. There's a food equity council that's doing a lot of great work right now, trying to address some of these barriers and find ways to make it more accessible. But I think the more we can reduce barriers and make it more accessible, both from a logistical standpoint and a financial standpoint, to utilize a lot of the space that we have and make sure that it's being done in a equitable and kind of community driven way, I think that's going to be a net good for our city and our state.
Yeah. So we have one question here from the audience, and I'll start with you, Sean, because I think this relates to kind of farm issues. Hunger is a very immediate problem, but thinking ahead to the future, how are your organizations planning, teaching, or preparing for more extreme weather events due to climate change and their impacts on the food system? Obviously, we could do a whole panel discussion on that, but have you guys been thinking of that yet?
We are forced to think about it every single day.
Yeah, after Sunday's weather event, right?
We're forced to think about it every single day. It feels like every year we're kind of evolving and making adaptations based on the weather. There are two things that come to mind for me. And I think one is just baked into what we're already doing is by keeping farms more local and more community driven. I think it's inevitably more sustainable, not just environmentally, but also, right, we have smaller amounts of land, which makes it more manageable to respond to the elements and make adaptations. And just growing things organically and in an environmentally sustainable way is inevitably going to allow your farm or your garden to be more sustainable and to be able to adapt to inclement weather. That's the first thing. I think on a practical level, right, I think the more creative and innovative we can all be in terms of thinking about how we grow, right? So there's a lot of great projects that are happening out there. We have a farm, we also have a second farm down in the south suburbs that's about 3 acres, and we're building multiple hoop houses there to be able to grow indoors and year round and kind of create a more controlled environment. There's lots of people doing indoor growing work, aquaponics, hydroponics, container growing. There's the Green Era project in Auburn Gresham, right? That's doing a lot of great work around composting. And so I think the more we can think about all the ways that we can create a more sustainable and regenerative system for the long-term future is definitely where we should be.
Selma, have the youth that you're working with, have they talked a lot about climate change and the environment and how it affects their communities and the ability to garden?
It doesn't get that deep with our youth, especially not right now, but we do have curriculum based around issues about sustainability and climate change. because the papers that we all discuss and we read, our communities are going to be the first and hardest impacted by environmental changes. I think they're calling it environmental apartheid now. And so, yes, this is something that we do speak about. We don't go too far, but it's more about making sure our youth know what the issues are so that as they continue to go into adulthood and be those people that will ultimately lead change, they are educated in the different issues and basically how it impacts their communities and the communities they'll go on to be able to create.
And have that, on the youth topic here, although they may not be talking about climate change and things like that, are they using social media, TikTok and other social media for whether it's cooking or growing or outreach or engaging with their peers that aren't involved in some of your programs?
They do that. They do. Social media is a part of their life. And of course, we all exchange information in regards to social media. We see things that we eventually go on the cooking program, experiment with. But we have to think as important as like environmental issues are for our youth. And yes, they do join our programs. Mental health is like one of the first things that we're really kind of pushing right now. Healthy eating, mental health, because those two things going together is what's getting us all through. So yes, they use social media. I'm gonna be honest with you, they use social media for more like dancing and stuff.
Yeah.
They don't really use it to tell people about Gardeneers. They will tell their friends they are involved in this really cool program and you can come over here and get a job too. They got spots open. Or, hey, come check out this garden that I go to at my school. They actually, I guess it's old school social media. They talk to their friends and then they just invite them in person because our gardens are spaces where no one will say, hey, you kids sitting in the garden, go away. No one's going to do that. And so for us, it's getting our youth to understand, yeah, that's cool. If you could do me a favor, put your phone down just for a little bit and come actually be present in this garden, and you can bring your friends too.
That's fantastic. Gardening is therapeutic for a lot of people.
It is.
Do you think that the youth are kind of realizing that and using this space for positive mental health development?
They've been doing that for a while. I actually started doing urban youth development with Urban Growers, Growing Power Chicago, right before they became Urban Growers Collective. And our youth would say sometimes when they came in, there would be days they didn't feel like talking to anybody, but we always had activities where youth could just go off and do it by themselves. And the one that most youth picked when they weren't feeling social was weeding. I can go over here and weed and no one will bother me. And that makes me feel good to just pull these plants out. And I've actually had adults at corporate sponsored volunteer days say the same. And it's like, man, just pulling that whole weed out felt so good. Yep, it sure did. And you cleared that patch for me. Thanks so much. So it's a twofer. It's a double-edged sword, as I like to call it. Yes, you did this and it felt great. And this helped me out. Yes. And everybody feels better. Everybody feels better leading garden.
Instant gratification that you've seen. Exactly.
And we love that now. Everybody loves that.
For sure. Michelle, coming back to the pre-pandemic, post-pandemic kind of era, Beyond Hunger obviously has evolved over 20 years from when you were an intern to now leading the organization. Do you see kind of an attitude change among not only the people you work with, but the recipients of what you guys do?
In some ways, yeah. I mean, I want to touch on something that Selma was highlighting, which is mental health. And Selma, I love you. I mean, you keep it real, right? I'm not going to pretend that these kids are, all about the academics. Sometimes they just need to be left alone and weed. But yeah, so the mental health aspects are really like something we hadn't thought about that much before the pandemic. And then for one of our programs, we had this before the pandemic, very small home delivery program for older adults and people with disabilities. And it literally in 1 month, it went from 80 households to 300 households. And so we had this huge expansion and then we had to keep it up. But one of the things that we found was vitally important in this program were the phone calls to the people asking what they wanted, because we structured that program so that they would have the choice of what they wanted to receive. So instead of just dropping off a box, somebody calls every one of those people every month and says, okay, hey, let's walk through the menu and see what you want to have. You know, we've got these 5 kinds of beans. Which ones do you want? And those conversations became this touch point for people that became, I would say, more important to some people than the food, because it was their only conversation. Like someone was saying, they were asked to stay inside for 2 years and lose their connection with their, you know, their neighbors and their church family and, you know, just the people at the corner store. So those conversations now last about a half an hour a piece. And I love being in the office when people are making the calls, because I get to hear that one side of it. And, you know, there'll be conversations about, oh, you didn't like those rice cakes? You know, so-and-so told me she used them to make peanut butter sandwiches. Oh my gosh, that's such a great idea. But it's just kind of this personal connection. So I think that mental health piece and food, as Selma said, they really go hand in hand. I mean, we all know that, right? If you want to get together with an old friend, what do? You invite them to dinner, or, you know, so it's that way of connecting these two things that's really important.
Do you think that was the same before the pandemic? Or did the pandemic maybe highlight that issue more, that we just all were reflecting a little bit more over the last 18 months?
Well, I think the need for it became more profound during the pandemic, because so for the home delivery program specifically, most of the people that were in the initial group that we had were through township services. And so they also had the opportunity to go get congregate meal sites, and those were shut down. So as opportunities narrowed, then the connection points any connection point became more important. And whether that was just coming through the pantry to pick up food and leave, or whether that was having somebody personally call you, became that much more important in the lack. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, Tim.
Yeah. No, I think that we've been reflecting a lot more over the last 18 months. And I think, you know, all of our organizations use food to make people's lives a little bit better, right? So whether it's specifically kind of mental health or isolationism or food insecurity or sustainability or youth development, right? We're all just, food is the vehicle that is consistent throughout. But I want to get to a question that one of the an audience member raised, and that's spoilage and food waste. Can you guys all just briefly talk about that? Really, you know, 200,000 pounds of food were donated, right? 20,000 meals, farms, urban gardens. Obviously, that's an issue for all of us. Can we all just talk a little bit about how do we try to limit that and what we do in that effort? Michelle, you want to start?
Yeah, sir. I'll jump into that. So yeah, it's logistics. It's just a massive logistical operation is what it comes down to. Because if, you know, we work with a couple dozen vendor partners, and so it's getting their food when it's on the cusp of spoilage out to people before it hits spoilage. And then we have a composting program too for when we don't get that window right. I have this picture of volunteers, like sometimes they'll get yogurt that's really, it's gone. And so I have a picture of this person like scooping out the yogurt to put it in the compost and recycling the plastic bin. I'm like, well, that's love, right? Sort of what Selma was talking about, like weeding. Like it's, if you're going to scoop out bad yogurt and put it in the compost, that's commitment to the environment. So yeah, we work with a bunch of different vendors, and it's really just trying to coordinate a vast number of volunteers that can get to that place, get it back to us, get it sorted and packaged and out to people who can use it in a short period of time. I think that's the biggest challenge. And so we have the meals part, we work with cafeterias to take before the food goes out. So in those pans that are kept back in the kitchen, if there's food left over there, then we the people at the cafeteria sort it into a little meal. So there'll be a starch, a protein, and a vegetable in a microwavable container. And then we can process that. But so people have often asked us at restaurants, like, what can you do with restaurants? And that, frankly, for us is beyond our logistical capability, because a restaurant might have 2 or 3 meals left over at the end of the day. They don't have a lot of waste, and we can't coordinate that. There are some apps that are trying to do just that, and then try to get them. But then they've also got the issue of restaurants close at night and food pantries aren't open at night. So what do you do with that food in between times? So,
Yeah.
so those logistical pieces, I think, are the puzzle to that.
How about Sean? How about for you guys? How do you limit food waste and spoilage issues? And obviously logistics is an important component, I'm sure, for you as well, but any tips?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of 2 ways that I really think about that. Like on the broader scale for our farm, we don't waste any of our food. And that's because we have relationships with food pantries and mutual aid organizations and senior housing facilities all in our community. And so we've got built out kind of schedules with them where they know once a week on Wednesday, they're going to get an assortment of things that we have in abundance that week. And so 50% of our food we donate and the other 50% we sell kind of on a sliding scale. And then I think on the more like individual, and then I should also say we probably compost about 1 to 2% of our produce, but it's a pretty minimal amount. On the individual side of things, I think we just try to, because even if you're eating super locally and you're hand packing your produce at the farm, it's still difficult to find that balance, right, of not wasting food and making sure that you're doing things right in kind of your home personal kitchen. So we try to equip people with as many resources as we can, both in terms of like how to store food, how to keep it for as long as possible, like how different fruits and vegetables respond best to different storage options. And then secondly, making sure people kind of feel equipped with resources and education around how different produce items can be used, whether it's jarring or putting it in a salad or roasting, like all the different ways that food can be used, not just in kind of one singular way, which I know is often how we tend to lean into that default mode. So I think those are the 2 kind of critical education pieces for us on an individual level.
Selma, do you get into food waste issues and spoilage with the kids and your educational component, or in practicality?
We do. And when it comes to food waste, we like to reframe like that word, just waste. Because when we think about food waste as an agricultural system, fruits and vegetables that may have been damaged by animals, especially when you start thinking about growing organically or at least as close to natural as possible, you're going to get that. If a squirrel gets to our melon before we do, we're not going to eat it, but technically to some that would be food waste. So when we think about food that we can't use, we do talk about that and why we can't use it. And we talk about the importance of growing food locally, like Sean mentioned earlier. By growing locally, we get to have food at its peak of ripeness, and then people want to eat it and it doesn't just sit on the shelf. And so for us, one of the ways that we're able to reduce the amount of produce that we leave in the fields or in the gardens is by having multiple farm stands on multiple days at multiple different sites, and making sure that we have multiple partners, like both Sean and Michelle mentioned, that are able to come or we're able to link up with and drop them off. So we collaborate with chefs that make prepared meals, because sometimes I think it's been like an overarching thing that it's one thing to give people access to healthy foods, but if they don't know what to do with it, it's kind of a moot point, right? And so if we give these vegetables to chefs that can prepare a meal, ultimately stimulate a conversation, that's one way that we can utilize getting food out and reducing the amount of food waste, right? Having farm stands that our youth actually help harvest the produce for. So that helps in a lot of different ways. One, it's human capacity. Our youth are helping us put food back into their own hands and in the community. And then 2, they're usually the first recipients of it, because we set up farm stands during the hours right after school. So they have to pass us in order to get it. And then we're making sure that those students and their families who have the students who grew it, their families get to enjoy it first. So we have our chefs and our farm stands, but we also are able to, any produce that is not distributed through those two means, we either have community partners that come and pick them up, or we utilize Love Fridges. We actually had a whole bunch of produce from this week in our fundraising event. We wanted to basically exhibit the different types of fruits and vegetables and the variety of colors and looks of them to our supporters and what's grown by our students. And when we were done, we put them in local refrigerators, because when we look at Love Fridges, and it's lovefridge.com is their website, most of the foods that are put in there are preserved. They usually have high carbohydrate or high sodium content levels, upwards of 24% in the salt content. And when you think of Americans and the portions that we have and the fact that we love our seconds and our thirds, putting fresh fruits and vegetables in Love Fridges, no questions asked on who's getting them, because anonymity when it comes to receiving help helps, help with humility and whatnot. And so those are the ways that we're able to reduce our food waste. Multiple harvest days, multiple ways we can get it out, multiple touch points, multiple ways in which it's being distributed. That's really the system that we use. And on top of that, we have school gardens. So we're not really growing a whole bunch. We have a few sites where we can grow a lot, but we have systems in place at those sites where we know we can put the food out.
That's great. So,
Hey, Tim.
Yes.
Before you go on, I just wanted to piggyback on something that Selma talked about, and that was her fundraiser. Because I think a lot of us, including probably members of the audience, go attend fundraisers or plan them. And one thing that we're incorporating, or that I'm trying to get incorporated, is that takeout containers as part of fundraising, gala, any kind of time you're serving food, there's going to be leftover food.
Mhm.
That food can't legally be given to people at a food pantry. But any guest there can take it home and have it for lunch. So if you have a stack of to-go containers, people will do it. They'll put together little packages, and that will reduce your food waste a lot.
Our venue, Hangout Lighting, they had containers for the caterer, JFOD. Hey, everyone, if you don't mind, if you could just take some food with you. And I'm like, please, please. Because a lot of people forget that, and they just think, oh, this is food we didn't eat. Let's just throw it in this refrigerator. And there have been times I've personally cleaned out refrigerators of food. I'm like, you can't give this to somebody. Like, would you want this? And so it's like, if we could just be more considerate about the types of food we're giving away and how we're like reducing waste, it's just even individuals. That was a great idea, Michelle.
Yeah.
And I think it's underrated.
Good point. Good point. We only have a few minutes left. I want to ask kind of an overall question. Let's think 6-12 months ahead. What are the next steps for each of your organizations in providing access to healthy lifestyles for the Chicago community? So 6 months, 12 months out, what are we all doing here? Selma, why don't you start?
I'm doing the exact same thing I'm doing now, but with more supporters. Because we have a wait list. And the thing is, as an organization, and as we think about our work culture, we do not want to stretch the people who have boots on the ground. We all are probably, when we think about just social aid and just social networks and social organizations, there's so many people out there to help, whether that's fortunately or unfortunately, that sometimes we tend to want to overstretch ourselves in order to reach as many people as possible. And so right now, as an organization, we are at a crossroads where we will help, but we will not overstretch ourselves. So we will continue to do the work that we're doing right now, making sure that our staff is taken care of and making sure that those staff members are able to give the most of themselves, not fully because it's a life-work balance, but they're able to give a lot of themselves to our community so that we can have an impact.
Great. Sean, one sentence, please. And then Michelle. We're running out of time.
One sentence. Direct connection between food and health. Working with health clinics, healthcare providers, making, what this panel is called, making that direct connection as food is medicine.
Great. Michelle?
The Train the Trainer program, and also we're working with the One Earth Film Festival to do cooking demonstrations alongside their film events.
That's great. So one of the questions, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Angel, was do we all work together, right? And how can we all work together if we don't? And I've got a lot of ideas for Top Box Foods and Beyond Hunger and Just Roots and the Gardeners working together, and I'm sure you guys all do as well. And I'm sure there's many people on that have been part of the audience. So I think that we should all commit to ourselves, right, in this nonprofit world, to break down any silos and collaborate for the benefit of the Chicago residents. So with that, Angel, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and we'll go from there. Thank you all, Michelle, Sean, Selma, wonderful discussion.
Thank you so much, Tim and panelists. That was such an amazing conversation. We really appreciate you being part of today's conversation and for being all in. As I mentioned earlier, today's program was brought to you by Community Health. Any donations you make today will support Community Health's mission to serve those without essential health care. Please consider making a contribution now to support Community Health. Instructions should be appearing on your screen, and I'll ask my colleague to drop a link in the chat for you as well. On behalf of the staff, board of directors, and volunteers at Community Health, I want to thank you all for being part of our All in Chicago event series. I hope that you are all leaving today with ideas for how we can work together to make the vision of access to care for all Chicagoans a reality. We have 4 more events coming up throughout the rest of the month. I encourage you to check out our website, allinchicago.org, and learn more about the great events coming up and register to be all in. We all have a critical role to play in this effort. Thank you for being part of today's event.